Everyone is talking about the current recession, but what most people don't realize is that things are going to get a lot worse than they think. There's a great financial crisis unfolding as we speak. But more than that, we may be entering into an era where the dollar will lose its place as the world's payment currency. Join us in this video as we unveil secrets and reasons behind these current crises and what you should do to protect yourself financially. It's quite clear that there's a financial crisis brewing already. We've seen the recent bank crashes, Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. These banks are just the ones that were unlucky enough to go down first due to poor risk management. You see, many banks in the US take on too much risk. Currently, First Republic Bank, Huntington Bank Shares, KeyCorp, Co-America, and Truist Financial are above liquidity risk. So Silicon Valley and Signature banks may not be the only ones to go down. In the next few months, others will follow.
I was asked to share my thoughts about the Silicon Valley Bank situation. Want to convey that it's very indicative of what the whole economy is like. So there's its particular situation, and the Fed coming in and guaranteeing all depositors. But it's a common situation. It exists pervasively. And what is it that I'm talking about? That there has been a lot of creation of debt.
But the problem isn't just the financial crisis affecting banks. There's also inflation affecting everyone too. According to Jim Rickards, inflation can arise from two causes or sides, the demand and supply sides. The inflation caused by the demand side is also called cost-push inflation. It's a situation where higher production costs result in a decrease in supply. If for some reason manufacturers encounter more difficulty or spend more resources in production, prices of goods will increase. One thing that has greatly influenced inflation in the US and other nations of the world is the Russia-Ukraine war. The Russia-Ukraine war has caused a shortage of oil, as Ukraine no longer exports food to nations as it used to, and Russia no longer delivers oil to other states as it used to. So we have more food and energy inflation. This energy inflation, however, only majorly affects states that decide to side with Ukraine, the US being number one. On the contrary, other nations like China are forming strong bonds with Russia. So China is getting Russia's oil, but the US is not. This is why oil prices in the US and other nations have increased, and inflation from the supply side has risen equally in response to these prices. Higher fuel costs are affecting production in typically every way. For instance, trucks are one of the most vital parts of any manufacturing and supply chain. These trucks run on diesel, so when the price goes up, the price of everything in the truck goes up too. And since the government doesn't produce stuff, they can't do much about supply-induced inflation.
And the psychology was, if you needed a TV set or refrigerator, new car, whatever, you say, I better buy it now because the price is going to be higher. If I wait a month or 2 months, the price is going to run away from me. So it had huge behavioral effects. Of course, gold was, going to the moon. There was a lot going on at the time. But Brian, you're right when you say we're putting up inflation numbers today that are the highest in 40 years. That is correct. A little 41, actually it was 1981 before we saw these numbers. But I remind people, the inflation in 1981
inflation will continue to soar unless the government can somehow drill for oil, plant farms, and make stuff. If the inflation continues, we may start experiencing feedback from the demand side, what Jim Rickards would call a demand pull. This is when customers begin to panic buy, as they suspect the prices of commodities will increase further. This panic buying strains the already weak supply and forces prices to go up even further. As prices increase, more customers will realize their predictions are true, and in response, they will want to do more panic buying, so the cycle continues. Currently, the inflation in the US is caused by the supply side only. The demand side hasn't started yet, but the government is doing everything to kill that demand side inflation from springing up. How are they doing it? By raising interest rates. You see, we all work, buy, and shop on credit. But what happens when the interest rates are too high? You borrow less, you spend less. Now that's what the government is aiming at. And so far, the results have been good. No crazy buying of cars from customers. But here's the thing, it comes at a cost: recession. Since customers can no longer buy stuff as they used to, businesses will go down, workers will be sent home, in other words, unemployment, and overall the economy will fall. If you notice, the automobile business was quite lucrative in the US and a major contributor to the GDP, but when the government started making crazy interest rates, the car bubble burst. Now, this is very similar to what happened in 2008. In 2008, the housing bubble was the major contributor to GDP in the US, But when it burst, everything went down the drain. We may be in a similar recession plus financial crisis once again, and even Jim Rickards fully agrees with this. The only problem this time is that it will be worse. This time, the almighty US dollar may lose its power. Even its role as a reserve currency will be challenged or stolen. How? Well, there are many threats to the dollar now. BRICS is one worthy mention. What is BRICS? BRICS is an abbreviation for the 5 leading emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The BRICS, the other nations that probably hate the US, are working on a unique payment system that may outshine the dollar. The dollar coup may be easier for 2 reasons. One, the dollar has gone way past the time it should have stayed as the world's reserve currency.
These crises can take a year or longer to play out. So if we're at the early stages of one, the banking crisis in particular, don't think that just because they cleaned up Credit Suisse and 4 other banks, that it's over. There'll be another major bank crash sooner than later.
And 2, the Feds have made quite some poor decisions in recent years that have put the dollar in a very bad position. Let's talk about the first reason. The US dollar wasn't always the world's reserve currency. Before the dollar, the French currency, franc, held that title from 1720 to 1815, and the Great Britain currency held that status from 1815 to 1920. In case you're unfamiliar with the term, a reserve currency is a particular foreign currency held in large amounts by central banks and major financial institutions for international transactions. However, it has held the title of the world currency for 100 years now, so it's high time the power changed hands. But you see, even if that were the case, it would still have been difficult for any currency to overthrow the dollar had the Feds not been ruining the currency with bad policies. Statistics have shown that the US government spent more than $17 trillion during the pandemic, but guess what? Most of that money was printed. If you're familiar with the laws of economics, you'll know that more money means higher costs of goods and services. But yes, the US government printed dollars as much as 16% of the world's GDP. Could this be one of the things responsible for the recession we're suffering today in America? Yes, it is. Now the dollar is approaching a terrible crash point. If not for a few good policies like petrodollar, the downfall of the US dollar may have already happened long ago. The petrodollar is a concept or agreement instituted in 1970, where Saudi Arabia would only sell oil in dollars, thus making the dollar more valuable, and in return, the US would sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. The system has helped the dollar stay on top of other world currencies, but yet again, this policy won't save America much longer. Recently, China and Saudi Arabia agreed to trade oil with the Chinese yuan. Now we have the petro yen. Other countries like Iraq and Brazil are also making trades with China using the yen, and even smaller countries like Kenya are joining the anti-dollar movement. But wait a minute. If countries are now accepting the yen for international trade, doesn't this mean that the Chinese yen will become the new global currency? Will China become the new America? Well, only time will tell. Obviously, nations like China and Japan had long predicted the fall of the US dollar, and they're already prepared for it.
71, Nixon took this off the gold standard. They had to back it up with something. So 74, Nixon and his protege Kissinger, they went to Saudi Arabia and says, if you make this the petrodollar, so they went from a gold dollar to a petrodollar. And so they gave the dollar immense power throughout the world because everybody had to take this stuff here. And so what happened when China enters the scene and all this stuff is going on, what Andy's talking about, this is going to come back on us now.
From the looks of things, the common people of America may suffer the greatest blow from this storm. Other nations are already armed to the teeth for the impending crisis. So now you know the impending doom awaiting the dollar, let's talk about how to save yourself regardless of what may come. But before that, if you're enjoying this video, take this time to give it a like and hit the subscribe button. Also share this video with anyone you know who needs the information in this video. Now, let's get back to our video. Remember the Great Recession of 2008, when houses and real estate crashed. It was a bad time for many people, but a good time for some investors like Robert Kiyosaki and Warren Buffett. Robert Kiyosaki bought thousands of houses during that period, so he became a billionaire when the prices rose again. Today, currently, the stock market is going down, but what if I told you there's no better time to invest than now? Do you doubt me? What if I told you that Warren Buffett made the most profits from buying stocks during the bear runs and then waiting decades before selling? Of course, you can only do that if you're patient. In essence, for the 2023 recession, it'd be very good if you could invest with a long-term goal because it's going to hit hard. Jim Rickards is not just calling it a financial crisis, but a liquidity crisis. From stocks to bonds to even banks, everything is predicted to crash. That's why Jim Rickards is calling it a liquidity crisis. If everything crashes, the government will want to, like they always do, protect themselves and the economy, even at the expense of the citizens. And so they may end up seizing your money, what Jim Rickards calls the Biden bucks. Imagine if all your money was locked up in your account and you couldn't get a dime out of it. The government hates bank runs, and they've seen lots of it, so they're adequately preparing for it this time.
I look for a severe recession in the U.S., really global, because your question was how's the global outlook? It's pretty bad. Maybe something closer to social unrest and riots in Europe, and then on top of that, possibly a global financial liquidity crisis.
So how can you prevent the government from seizing your hard-earned cash? Buy gold. We all know the dollar is pegged to gold, so when it goes down, like it's going down now, the price of gold will increase. Start accumulating gold if you want to save yourself from the coming dollar crash. Demand for gold is already hitting all-time highs, so many people are seeing the coming boom and rushing to stock up on gold. In a few months, the price of gold may go so high that middle-class citizens won't be able to afford it anymore. If you must act now. You can get gold stocks, but Jim Rickards believes gold bullion is the best way. Gold is currently about $2,030 per ounce. However, if you can't afford gold, buy silver. It's the closest thing to gold. But wait, out of all the things to invest in, why gold and silver? You see, gold and silver are what you'll call real money, or what some people will call God's money. Unlike our regular printed money today, these natural precious metals have an intrinsic value that is hard to manipulate or control. Before the idea of printing bills ever came to the mind of world leaders, gold, silver, and other precious metals served as measures of worth and exchange. Investing in gold is one of the best ways to protect against financial backlash from a crisis. Stocks aren't climbing, they're going down. You can buy them now that they're down, and then see how much money you'll make in the next decade. If you're a big-time investor, take out money to real estate. See about getting properties outside the U.S. Central banks of various countries like Mexico, Kazakhstan, the Philippines, Vietnam, China, Iran, Turkey, and Japan are buying gold. China has over 1,500 metric tons so far. Japan probably has lots of gold hidden away but never mentioned it. They only recently said they'd increase their reserve from 600 tons to 900 tons, but it's quite impossible to buy 300 tons of gold just like that in a month. So what does this mean? These guys are preparing for something most people aren't seeing. So you must prepare too. Buy gold, silver, and Bitcoin. That's all for this video. If you'd like to watch another insightful video, click on any of the thumbnails showing now on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our next videos. Bye for now.